I am really honored and privileged to be in this room with these ladies and with all of you today, focusing on what I think is one of the most important topics in our education system, how we can work together and design systems that manifestly improve the outcomes of students with disabilities, which is something that is really near and dear to my heart. My name is Preston, in case you didn't figure that out from the thing up there. And I previously served as a Deputy Assistant Superintendent for Diverse Learners at the Louisiana Department of Education, where I oversaw our special education strategy. And in a few moments, I'm going to ask these ladies to introduce themselves. But before we do that, I want to posit something to this group. And that is that for decades, since the passage of IDA, we have invested billions upon billions of dollars, almost countless dollars, and countless human hours to try to solve a seemingly intractable problem. And that problem is, how do we manifestly improve the lives of some of our most marginalized students with disabilities? And that's a pretty hard thing to do. And what we know is that despite all of that money and all of that effort, nearly half a century later, we are still in a place where we have an education system that is not designed to ensure that all students with disabilities can learn at grade level. And that's pretty wild, because most students with disabilities spend the majority of their day in a general education setting. And yet, despite that, we don't have a system that's designed to ensure special educators are trained on the core curriculum that students spend the majority of their time with every day. That's crazy. And we don't have a system that yet at scale ensures that general educators can learn how to differentiate while maintaining rigor or have the tools to do that easily. This is not a failure of teachers who are showing up and working relentlessly every day. This is a failure of our education system that is not designed to support them as they're doing that work each day. But it doesn't have to be this way. And Louisiana is an example of a state that has been working quietly for more than a decade to design an education system that will work for all students. And that work began with a core belief. And that belief is that every student, including every single student with a disability, is capable, deeply capable of engaging in the full rigor of grade level learning. So what happens when a state truly believes this and works to design a system that can deliver on that belief? We're going to get into that, but before we do, let's meet some of the ladies who have led this work in Louisiana. So Dana, Tiffany, Jessi, I'd love for y'all to introduce yourselves. What's the role that you play in the system in Louisiana? And what's one value that you bring to this conversation that has helped you drive outcomes for students with disabilities? Yeah. Dana, want to start?
Thank you. Dana, Talley is my name, and I've actually had several roles. I started out as a high school math teacher with an inclusion teacher with me every single year, would never teach without an inclusion teacher. And then I spent 15 years at the Louisiana Department of Education, where we actually rolled out the strategy that we're going to talk about today. And then I had the privilege of returning to Lincoln Parish as the Chief Academic Officer. And spent 4 years there doing that work. And I think the value that I bring to this panel today, you know, it's easy for folks to sit up here and tell you what you need to do. And that's what I did at the State Department. I went to districts and I told them what to do for 15 years. But I had the opportunity to go back to Lincoln to see if what it was that I was telling folks to do for all students, including students with disabilities, if they do it, will it actually work? And so I want to share some results with you, but first I want to say, like, we've got a very, very long way to go. But I returned to Lincoln in 2020, and by 2023, Lincoln Parish was top 10 in terms of overall proficiency, number 1 in terms of growth in proficiency, and number 5 in the state. We were ranked in terms of our district performance score with students with disabilities. So I'm here to share what we did there in our parish and in our state.
Good afternoon. My name is Tiffany Curry, but I am recently Tiffany Curry Young. So that's why you see it all over the place.
Very important.
Don't get married during the school year. Not smart. I am a principal at an elementary school. We're pre-K through 5th grade. I was a classroom teacher for 11 years, 5 years of reading interventionist, then coordinating teacher for 2 years, and now 3 years as the principal. And so my role is knowing the plan on how to improve all students and living our school's vision. The school that I am the principal of, the vision just so happens to be high expectations, high achievement for all. That was there before me. So if this is the vision, let's make it happen. We have a playbook, let's do it. All right?
And just to be clear, she's here because they do what she says at her school.
Hey everyone, I'm Jessi. I'm so excited to be on the panel with you guys. I lead Blue Engine. I am representing the partner voice as part of this story. I know you all worked with a number of partners, but we got to be part of the team. We're really excited about that. A value I'm bringing to this conversation is impact. We have a saying at Blue Engine, good intentions can't be confused with measurable results, and that is so deeply important to me as I was originally a math inclusion teacher and feel deeply connected to the work through that experience, but also the fact that I walk through life day to day basically feeling like a sped kid in like a grown-up professional body. And so I understand why the work matters so much so that every kid can go off to college and career and be wildly successful, and how important it is that every adult that they interact with reinforces that message in school, because once they leave school, they're going to be getting a lot of messages in their lives about what they are and are not capable of.
Wonderful. Okay, so let's do a little bit of table setting, and then we're going to talk to our panel. And at the very end, we're going to hold for some questions from the audience. But let's learn a little bit more about what Louisiana did to improve outcomes for students with disabilities. And if you're like me, I like to know the outcomes first. I want to see the receipts. So let's start with that. As I think most of you, if not all of you, know in this room, the most recent NAEP results came out earlier this year, and they showed some pretty incredible results in Louisiana overall and for Louisiana students with disabilities. Now, this is maybe a complicated graph, so let me just take a moment to orient us to it. So what you're going to see here is the percentage of students who are at or above proficient in Louisiana on 4th grade reading, and that spans over the last decade plus, from 2013 to 2024. And I want to name a couple of things on this. One is what we see in the headline, that the percentage of students with disabilities at or above proficient has tripled over the last 10 years. That's pretty incredible. The second thing I want to note is that if you look at the top line, you're going to see in the gray, all students in public education nationally. In the golden sort of straight color, you're going to see Louisiana all students. And then on the bottom, you'll see the dotted lines are going to be students with disabilities there. And in that overall trend over time, what you're going to see is that the results for students with disabilities don't perfectly mirror, but do somewhat parallel what you're seeing for students in Louisiana overall. And so what that means in part is that by designing a system that can ensure that students with disabilities achieve more, you see an overall growth for all students within the state. It's not the only driver, but you can't see growth for all students unless you are addressing the 1 in 5 students who have an IEP or a 504 plan, right? You have to design for that to see that type of result. The other thing I want to note, and I think that the long range of this really matters, is that designing a system to improve outcomes for students with disabilities is not a one-year game. You don't put something in place and expect to see results at scale. You build and design a system that year over year starts to track that. And what you see here when you're looking at students with disabilities, that bottom golden line there, is that that growth is happening incrementally and then accelerates more as you start to see things that were foundational in implementation go deeper and deeper and get more sophisticated and more evolved, which is pretty incredible. The last thing I want to note on this is that I think it's really wonderful that results for students with disabilities have tripled, that proficiency rate has tripled, but it's gone from just over 5% to just over 15%. That's not good enough. We have a long, long way to go, much more work ahead of us in order to get to where we ultimately need to be. But what it does show is that all kids are capable, students with disabilities are capable, and we can design a system to achieve that. We often think about 4th grade, now let's look at 8th grade, very similar results. The results for students with disabilities have tripled just about over the course of the last 10 years. And then looking at this from a different cut, let's just zoom in for a moment just on students with disabilities. On this graph here, what you're going to see is the growth percentage from 2013 to 2024 for students with disabilities. The red bars are Louisiana's results. The gray bars are the results for students with disabilities nationally. The takeaway is clear. 4th grade reading, 4th grade math, 8th grade reading, 8th grade math. Louisiana is growing. And Louisiana is growing at a time when the results for students with disabilities nationally is going in the opposite direction. And in fact, Louisiana is #1 on that rate of growth in, I believe, 3 out of 4 of these areas. Don't ask me to quote the one that we're not #1 on, but pretty incredible results, right? So then the question becomes, how did that happen? Louisiana as a state did 3 things. First, they set a clear vision for what the experience of a student should be like in the classroom, got really concrete about that student vision, and then invested all of the adults in that vision. That was the North Star. So when everything else came, it came back to a question of, are we doing what you see here on the screen and ensuring that all students are in schools that treat them with dignity and respect, and where they have the opportunity to build knowledge of the world, read meaningful text, express ideas through writing and speaking, and solve complex problems. This seems simple, but most systems don't design to drive themselves with that classroom level student experience in mind and center that. This is the North Star. That is true for all students. It is equally true for students with disabilities. There is not a separate vision for students with disabilities in Louisiana. The second thing the state did is they said, okay, we've got the vision, now how do we make it real? The first thing we need to do next is define the actions that every adult in the system needs to take to make that a reality. What does the state need to do? What does the school system or district need to do? What's the school need to do? What do teachers need to do? All of that aligned to that vision. And one of the things that's really important in that is that all teachers, including special education teachers, were trained on the things that were core to that vision. So again, not separate, but really quite integrated. The third thing that the state did is they aligned all the available levers to help the adults take those actions. The state has a set of unique levers that they can pull at various times in various ways to help incentivize a set of actions. And I'm going to name 2 of them briefly. One is funding, So Louisiana spent a lot of time pulling together all of the funding resources they had available that would help the adults to take the actions that they most needed to take, to buy high quality instructional materials, to provide training to general education teachers and special education teachers. Another one of the levers that they pulled, and we're going to talk about this a bit more today, is in support and training. Helping to partner with districts, with schools, with teachers, the folks from the state and vendor partners who had the expertise in a supportive way to help take those actions. We can't just expect that teachers are going to do these things alone with that support. We need to find the best of who can do that work with them in partnership and do that well, and embed them month over month, year over year to do that work. And oftentimes when I talk about this story and I'm talking about it through the lens of students with disabilities, people stop me at this point and they say, Kristi, that's great. That's wonky too, and maybe a little bit hard to understand, but you're talking about systems and you're talking about all students. You're not really talking about a strategy for students with disabilities. You're not talking about how we're going to improve reading outcomes for students with autism or students with specific learning disabilities, dyslexia, whatever the case may be. And I often take that moment to say, we need to do a little bit of myth busting, because we can't operate in a world where we have a set of 20 different strategies for how we're going to improve outcomes for every subgroup of kids. We need to center on that core strategy and then make that work for every single kid. And the way that we did that, building on these levers, is we said, well, what are the gaps to making sure that things like high quality core instruction can really work for every kid, be in a place where every kid can access that, engage with it, and actually get to the full rigor of that learning. And so we did things like leverage vendors. We created in Louisiana a first of its kind vendor marketplace where we elevated Louisiana providers who did this type of work well, who could partner with schools and work with general educators on differentiation, who could launch co-teaching models, who could build the systems and structures. And we elevated the folks in Louisiana, and then we brought in the best folks that we could find nationally to do that work. And then we incentivized through funding districts to partner with them to do that work and do it well. Then over time, we deepened it. And so in the next administration, because states have administrations and change over in the same way we do at the federal level, they deepened that through the special education playbook, where they said, okay, that's great that we're doing this partnering. Now let's think about some of the structural things we need to change in the school day so that we can build in things like intervention blocks that prepare students with disabilities for upcoming learning and an acceleration model and things like that, that would help to systematize this across school settings and across district settings. Okay, that's a lot. Let's shift gears. Okay, so we got the basic table setting here, what Lucy did, the results that we have, some of the basics on the who, what, where, why, and how, and that secret sauce of saying, okay, set vision, make it about kids, define the actions of adults, and then pull the levers to make sure that the adults take that action, those actions. Okay, we're going to switch now to talking about the panel. So, Dana, I'm going to start with you, and I'm going to awkwardly come and sit. Okay. Yeah, thank you. Okay. So, Dana.
Hello.
Hello. Great to see you. Thank you for being here today.
You're welcome.
Thanks. Okay. So, we often hear that teachers struggle to implement HQIM in classrooms because of diverse student needs. That's a hard thing for teachers. From your time at the state, can you give an example of how you've used the state's unique levers to ensure students with disabilities can access Tier 1 instruction using high-quality instructional materials?
So I'll get to the example in a minute. There are a couple things I do want to share, though, and some of this will sound a lot like what Kristi-Jo was saying, but I want to go into a little bit more detail. So, first of all, we had to start with the idea, like Kristi said, that all students, including students with disabilities, should have access to grade level learning every day. And the idea was meeting the needs of individual students. And so what I mean by this, and this is really important, and Kristi-Jo alluded to this, it's not about doing something different for a certain group of kids. So I don't take all of the students with disabilities and go put them in the cafeteria and do something special with them. It's about giving teachers the right resources, the high quality instructional materials, and then giving them the knowledge that they need to use those resources in a way that they can create an entry point for every student into the lesson, whether the student has a label or not. Because we've got a lot of students who don't have labels who need entry points into lessons. Another thought I had here with this question is, I think that teachers should assume that all kids can until there's overwhelming evidence that they can't, and then they can provide the support they need so that they can do the work. But as Kristi mentioned, we knew as a state that we had to get high-quality instructional materials in the hands of teachers, and that's gen ed teachers and special education teachers. We knew that all students, including students with disabilities, had to have access to those lessons every single day. And so what that meant was we had to have all teachers, including special education teachers, get trained on the curriculum. It also meant that all teachers, including special education teachers, had to have time within the day to really internalize units and lessons. And then all teachers, including special education teachers, actually needed feedback on their implementation of the curriculum. So what we did specifically is the levers that we pulled, and there are more, but some that I wanted to highlight. As Kristi said, we did incentivize the purchase of high-quality instructional materials and high-quality professional learning providers through grant funding. But we also provided guidance that said it's not just general education teachers who are going to get this training, it's special education teachers as well. And when I went to my districts and I saw the people on the list, if there were not special education teachers on the list when the company was there to train them on the curriculum, I went directly to the CAO and said, we've got to fix this. The other thing that we did is we provided guidance on what teacher collaboration time should look like, which included the fact that the gen ed and the sped teachers have got to have time to plan together. And then we also provided the what we called a classroom support tool. So it's just things that leaders look for when they go into the classroom. And it's just 3 things. It's use of curriculum, including pacing. It's whether or not the kids are doing the heavy lifting, the thinking, the talking, and the work of the lesson. And then the kind of feedback that teachers are giving kids on the quality of the work from the curriculum. And I have a couple of other things I want to share here around this, and then I'll get to the example, which is what your question is. I apologize. But I know we probably, that'll be typical for me, so we probably don't have state folks here, but let me just say this. Districts are looking for answers. And if we don't give district answers, they're going to be forced to make it up. And sometimes that goes well, and sometimes it does not go well. And so, another piece that we had at the State Department had to think about was, are all of these things that we are saying, all of the messaging that we're putting out there in the communication, is it translating into the things we want to see in classrooms? And so another lever that we had at the State Department was field-facing staff, and that's what I did. I led a team of folks who worked with 34 districts, and we supported superintendents, district staff, and principals, just making sure they were implementing the strategy. So let me give you an example of what that would look like. So I went into a district after we started rolling this out, and I was with the district academic lead and the principal, and we were in a middle school math classroom. And right as we were getting to sort of the heart of the lesson, I saw a teacher come to the door and ask 5 or 6 kids to come out and go with her. And if you know me, my neck turned red, my blood started boiling, and I was thinking, this better not be what I think it is, right? Because we've told folks that special education students need to be in the classroom getting the lesson. So of course I followed them out, and I looked at the district person and the principal and said, follow me. We followed the teacher into a separate classroom, and she was having the students complete an assignment from the prior day. So the students who are struggling the most miss the lesson, and we're falling farther behind. Oh, the other thing I would say is, I made a note to follow up on that. That's the other thing about field-facing staff. You don't just go and spot a problem and then work with them to try to figure out like how we're going to solve this problem and change this at this school and also throughout the district. But then in my subsequent follow-ups, that would be the thing we would go and look for and we would give feedback around.
I love that point because, you can set the vision, you can talk about the actions to take, but if you aren't in partnership with districts, with schools, day in, day out, you can buy the curriculum and then it will sit unboxed in a corner and teachers will use what they've used for 20 years. It takes so much dedicated work over so much time to get to that kind of result with the accountability that Dana's talking about there, but accountability in partnership over time. Yeah. Awesome. Dana, one more for you. Okay. So transitioning from your state role to your district role, you were in the state for 15 years and then you went back to Caddo to serve as the chief academic officer, really making this a reality. I'm curious about how your state level work helped you to see what you needed to do differently as a district leader and what you did differently, and particularly when it comes to Tier 1 instruction.
So Lincoln is the district that I went back to. It's where I taught initially. Because of my state experience, I really got to see things when it was done well and things when it wasn't done well. So I knew what to look for. And when I first got back to Lincoln, I heard a lot of things like, those are your kids, these are my kids. I also heard, I remember one time I was asking about the performance of a class or a student on a unit assessment, and I would hear things like, oh, well, that's an inclusion class, or that's a student with disabilities. Or the worst thing I would hear was, oh, but that student is about to be evaluated. Okay, so we just pause and stop teaching and hope that when the student gets this label that something magical is going to happen and all of a sudden all of the academic struggles are going to go away. It's like, no, that's not what's going to happen in this district. So I knew two things had to happen, and this first one is very important. I knew that if we wanted to improve outcomes for students with disabilities in Lincoln Parish, it could not be a SPED initiative coming from the SPED director. It had to be an academic initiative coming from the superintendent, the assistant superintendent, or chief academic officer. And in Lincoln, it was me. I supervised principals. I was chief academic officer. Folks were going to do what I told them to do. So it came directly from me. The second thing is, the other thing is, I told the superintendent once I got there that he needed to put the SPED department under academics. And so then they were reporting directly to me, so that helped with alignment as well. The second thing we needed to work around were just our mindset about students. And so we partnered with SPED Strategies. So Jamie Wong, that I worked with at the State Department, we did some work with them. She sent in Sarah Fletcher to do initial meetings with us and trainings with us. And I will tell you, I was one of those that wrote down every single thing Sarah said. And then when I left the training, I went into every school and repeated every single thing that Sarah said. Because here's what's happened. The only way you can brainwash people is if you keep saying things over and over and over again until finally they start saying it. And then you're like, okay, we're where we need to be. But here are some of the things that Sarah said that I repeated. One, we get to solve tough problems. We're better together. All students are general education students first. Inclusive education is meeting the individual needs of all students. All students should have access to grade level learning every day. And listen to this, all educators and staff can be successful in supporting all students with access to grade level learning. And this is even better. School leaders can and must support educators in meeting the needs of all students. Because here's what happens. How many of us have heard a teacher say kids can't? And does that make us mad? But how many principals have said teachers can't? And how many district staff have said principals can't? You know what? We've got to assume that folks can until there's overwhelming evidence that they can't. And if they can, it's our job to support them at every level. So at the same time, the LDOE, as Kristi mentioned, with the help of Nate Livingston from New Solutions K-12, they were revising the SPED playbook. And they focused on 3 best practices, and it's going to sound a lot like what we've been talking about here. So the first practice is focus on core instruction. So high quality instructional materials, keep SPED kids in the classroom. 2, extra time to learn. So almost all kids at some point will need extra time to learn. He really talks about making sure that you're having kids that struggle the most, getting the tutoring and the intervention from the content experts instead of necessarily the SPED teacher if that's not their content area. And then third is strong content teachers. So using professional development and teacher collaboration time to really build their knowledge, not only of the curriculum, but of the content, and then how to create those entry points for kids. And I'll say too, you know, what we did in Lincoln is we just took the word SPED out of LDOE's SPED playbook and just called it the LDOE playbook. And that became our academic strategy in Lincoln. So that's what we did for all kids.
I love that. That's such a great shift. And I love how you're paralleling a lot of what we saw at the state, right? Centering a vision for all kids, focusing on helping adults to shift their mindsets, shift their behaviors to that end, and leveraging those tools for that. Tiffany, welcome. A core component of Louisiana strategy, as I think we've all established at this point, is making sure that teachers and students are using high quality instructional materials throughout the entire lesson. That sounds easy, but implementation is hard. As an instructional leader in your school, how did you ensure every student could access and engage in grade level learning?
All right, now that's a question. So let me preface with, I got to Dubach Elementary School the 2020-2021 school year. This school is very rural. There's like no Wi-Fi in this area, but I'm trying to convince kids to come back to school because we were virtually learning, but there's no Wi-Fi, so they couldn't do that. They were a D school at the time, and so obviously we weren't doing the playbook things. And so again, our vision statement was high expectations, high achievement for all. And so one of the very first things I did was I made a cute little poster and put it everywhere around the school. They're gonna see it in the bathroom stalls, they're gonna see it in the cafeteria, they're gonna see it in the lounge, they're gonna see it in the hallways, because we gotta believe this. Say it enough, they start to believe it. And so that was like one of the very first, didn't bother anybody, gave me something to do one day in the summer when I was there. Let me stick all these cute little flyers up around the building. And I said it every meeting, on every memo, every weekly Hornet Buzz on Sunday at 5 p.m. I said it, like, this is what we believe all of our students can and they must. And you can do it too. So that was how I started the teacher buy-in, that all students can learn, and it's your job to figure out how. Like, that's why you're here. And so I too did have some teachers in my building was like, well, those are her kids. No, are they on your homeroom roster? Well, yeah. Well, they're your kids. They're your kids first. They're on that person's roster second. They're your kids. And so I had to change some mindsets, but I also needed to make sure that my teachers were prepared. And so I have no problem with going in and planning with you and doing all the things that you need so that you are prepared, so that you know the HQIM and understand it to the point where you can re-deliver it for students to be successful. Oh, you struggling, you don't know how to plan? Say less. Let me create a protocol for you for lesson planning and or annotating, because we don't really do lesson plans anymore, sad face. So that you can plan with these kids in mind, and I'm talking about all of your students, because at some point everybody struggles in something. Does that make them not your student? Even your gifted students struggle at some point throughout the school year. So making sure they're prepared. Again, having teacher collaborations where the inclusion teachers were also included. They have to know the information, because what are you doing when you pull these kids out? if you don't even know the content? Is it just a study hall? And if that's the case, leave them there. Because we don't have study hall on our schedule. We're elementary school. And so if you're not capable of doing extra work with them, we don't need to waste that time. We're just wasting their time. Again, we stop pulling out during core. Because guess what? I also get to be the ODR at my school, which means I am in almost every IEP meeting. And I require that you send me your IEPs 2 days before the meeting so that I can proof them. Because we're not just giving accommodations for the sake of giving accommodations. We're giving accommodations that are going to work because we get to write the plan. We get to adjust the plan. It is a lot to have IEP meetings, but guess what? If it's not right, we're going to have another meeting because we need to amend this. So we're being really intentional about what we're providing our students as well. And in the event that it's not working, we can go back and adjust it. But our plans say that our students are in the classroom 80% of the time. So that means that 20% cannot happen during core instruction. All right? And what else? Don't over-accommodate. Be mindful of what you write in the IEPs. And again, high expectations for all. That's what we do.
I love that. And I love where you ended there on the connection to IEPs, right? Because there's such an underutilized lever to helping to make sure that we are designing for access to grade level learning and making sure that the accommodations support that, the goals support that they don't serve a separate purpose there. I think that's really, really incredible.
Can I add, and it's not my time to talk again, but just to add to that, the SPED playbook that the LDOE, the Louisiana Department of Education, put out, it has a lot of guidance around IEP writing, because what we found was the IEP was the barrier for doing the right thing for kids. What you've got to do is you've got to figure out what the right thing for kids is, and then make sure the IEP matches that. And so that's something we're still working on in Louisiana.
So well said. Jessi, hi.
Hey.
Hey. So you partnered with LDOE and with Lincoln Parish.
We sure did.
And you did that to build the capacity of general educators to meet the needs of all learners. You partner with a lot of states and districts across the country. I'm curious, from your vantage, what did Louisiana do differently, and how did that help you as a vendor in the space be more effective?
So the easiest way to describe this is, how many people are like school people, teachers, former teachers, instructional? Okay, so we know classrooms. Okay. When you go into a classroom that has, we're talking about a lot of inclusion classrooms here, that have general education students and special education students, and those classrooms are working really well for all students. What is true is that as an observer, you can't tell which kids have IEPs and which kids do not have IEPs. And furthermore, these classrooms typically have a content or general education teacher and a special educator in the classroom, right? And you can't tell who's who. We also all know, those who've been in schools, most classrooms aren't operating like that. But that's what's true. The same thing was true for this team. So as I was establishing partnership with LDOE, they came on a site visit. We were only working in New York City at that time. They flew a team out to come and visit some of the work we were doing and talk. I could not, yes, they introduced themselves, but the way they engaged, Kristi did not engage like a leader of special education. They could all talk about everything. And the same was true when we got to Lincoln and Parish. I mean, Dana was the CAO, and she was like, I will be running this meeting, even though we're talking about special education. It's actually very awkward for me to call her Dana. I want to call her Miss Talley. And so it's just different. So the first thing that struck me was that they were aligned, they were coherent, there was collective ownership, and there was deep collaboration. And so that was really, really special. That also sounds basic, but that is just not what we find in every place. The second thing, and this is not new, y'all have spoken about this, but one thing that we're noticing as we grow our organization to more states and more systems, and actually I should preface this with LDOE and Lincoln Parish, those were our first partnerships outside of New York City, where we were working only at the school level, so this was new for us. So I thought all of these teams, just like, this was just what teams do. No. No. But they defined clear mindsets that they wanted every person who is going to interact with students to hold, and they said those out loud. You must believe this. And they communicated and set that vision really clearly. And that was helpful for us as a vendor because we knew that it was our role. That has been set. We are going to help build the skills and help make it happen. And what happens in a lot of other places is there isn't that clear vision or expectation. And so when we go to do our work, and I'm sure this is resonating with other partners, we go to do our work and you end up at a school and school leaders aren't clear, teachers aren't clear. And so that was really helpful. We had our marching orders. We knew exactly the role that we were supposed to play as part of this broader team.
I think that's such an incredible point to make at the end of that, because states do not have a ton of capacity. Districts don't have a ton of capacity. Schools do not. And so vendors play such a critical role in that, and being able to extend that capacity, deepen that implementation and partnership. And they're often staying for years, past changes in administration, past changes in who the CAO is and whomever. And so they can extend that work of implementation, deepen it over time in a way that's just critical and undervalued in some ways to how a state can advance outcomes for students, including students with disabilities.
Can I piggyback on a couple
Absolutely.
things she said? So, when we decide that we're going to go into a partnership with a vendor, the first thing is, we have our district priorities, and we look for vendors, our partners, who can uniquely support our priorities. So we don't just say we have a SPED problem. These folks, they work with SPED, so they're going to come in and do this. The other thing I would like to say is, as CAO, and this goes back to just sort of this being an academic strategy and not a SPED strategy, I was in all of the meetings in the beginning. So I met with the vendors ahead of time to plan. I met with them after to debrief. I was in the meetings. Because think about this, if I, the CAO, am sitting in meetings with principals and teachers, SPED and general ed, and the SPED director, and I am engaged and I am able to make connections. The vendor says this, I stop and say, hey, that means this here in our district. One, it ensures coherence, but two, it lets the school know, I value this is important to me, and my expectation is that you do the same. And I really think that's important. I think too many folks are just hands off. And when I first got to Lincoln, I actually, I co-taught, and I had the best inclusion teacher in the entire world. And I left Lincoln for 15 years and came back, and I went into classrooms where there were two teachers, and I'm like, what has happened? It's like this, one teach, one assist. One is teaching, the other is sitting by a kid or helping with management. And so they weren't playing a meaningful role. And so that's when we said, okay, let's partner with Blue Engine, because Blue Engine can come in and train our teachers, but also we invested in a district co-teaching specialist, and Blue Engine was then able to train that person on how to support and coach and give feedback to teachers. So we're not just also about, you guys come in and do your thing. It's no, you come in and align what you're doing to our priorities, and we're going to have you build capacity of someone in our district so that when you do leave, we can sustain this because we think it's important. That's why we're doing this.
I love that point. And speaks to what Dana did and what many others in the state did of really leading on that vendor strategy, bringing vendors in on vision, and making sure that they were advancing the priorities of the state, of the district, which is incredibly powerful when you can bring in that capacity and expertise that you don't have internally to move the needle for kids. Jessi, I'm going to come back to you for a second. And I think on that thread of vendors and what that means in a space, one of the levers that a state can pull is the vendor lever. And Louisiana curated vendor marketplaces and high quality instructional materials, high quality professional learning, special education as well. I'm curious from your perspective as somebody who navigated this as a vendor, how did that help you as you think about scale, particularly for the entrepreneurs in the room who are trying to think about entry and scale and what works and doesn't work?
Yeah, I think at this moment in time in our organizational trajectory, we were at a very similar stage as a lot of the ventures in this room. And we were faced with this total disadvantage where we were tiny, we were New York City only, we had absolutely no brand recognition whatsoever. And so what that meant was, if you're leading a smaller org, you have these massive organizations who have long-standing relationships with state agencies and districts, and because of the strength of those relationships and they're solving a particular problem, they'll be like, oh, now you're struggling with that? Well, we can help you with that too, even if they don't have any experience in doing that. And relationships matter so much. They're so important in the work that we do. The work is hard, and we cannot do the work without strong relationships. But what was different was Kristi was leading special education for the agency at that time, and she got really clear, I'm actually trying to solve a problem with middle school math outcomes, period. And she came looking, she shared earlier, they looked in Louisiana, they looked elsewhere for a vendor who had a demonstrated track record with those outcomes. And that led her and the team to come up to New York City to speak with Little Blue Engine at that time, because we were crushing it. We were working only exclusively in inclusion classrooms, and we were showing that students who learned in classrooms where teachers were being trained by Blue Engine were learning 6 additional months on top of what you'd expect. And that was just teacher job embedded support. And so I think what was really helpful was that she had that clarity, and then because she had that clarity, because we had expertise in how you train teachers and what conditions matter for all students to be able to learn, she was willing, and the team was willing to take a bet on a newer organization, new to Louisiana, and we had a shared understanding that we had expertise in some areas and we didn't in others, and they had expertise in some areas and not in others, and we got clear on roles and responsibilities, and we were willing to adapt and co-create. We did not have an off-the-shelf product for them. Like, Lincoln Parish is a wildly different context, as you can imagine, than the South Bronx. And so that's what we were brought in to do. And then the next phase at the district level, when we worked with Dana, was like, yeah, that middle school math thing, that's cute, but I have an early literacy thing. That's what you're going to be doing. And I was like, oh, okay. And we worked on that together in partnership. And I went back and looked after our first year pilot. And when we started that pilot, 0% of teachers surveyed agreed that all students can understand challenging concepts. 0%. At the end of our pilot, 87. Now, 87 is not 100, and we need to get to 100, but, I'm working on accepting incremental progress. Those who know me, I'm very impatient. But 87, that's insane after a year. We also saw in Blue Engine classrooms a 22% increase in second grade reading proficiency after 1 year of support, whereas classrooms that weren't being supported by Blue Engine had 5%. So I think that just demonstrates that if you are clear on values, impact mattered to us. If you are willing to co-create and get clear on expertise, roles, and responsibilities, and look outside of existing relationships, you can do incredible things for both teachers and kids.
I do want to say one more thing about relationships. Vendor lists are great, but what I care about is someone I trust recommends someone to me. That's when I listen, and so I do think that's important. People that I've worked with, I then reach out to other districts and say, like, I trust these folks. They did a great job with us. But I do think that's important, building those relationships, and get just word of mouth was what was most important to me as a district person.
Yeah, I think just to build on that point a little bit, what separates so many vendors in that space is partnership, right? It's not the sort of sales angle, but it's their willingness, as Jessi and Dana and Tiffany were all saying, to really work deeply in partnership, to evolve, to work through the knots together in service of the goal that you're doing. And I think that's so important. We're going to close with one more question. Tiffany, this is coming your way. And then we're going to magically have a few minutes for questions. Okay. Tiffany, this is a different sort of track. Does the new funding environment, ESSER sunsetting, we've had some of the rollback in the federal funding, declining student enrollment, we've heard all of these terms already many times in the course of this summit. When we think about how this funding environment is changing, does that make you think differently about which vendors you'll partner with?
It absolutely does, because when you have a lot of money, you just kind of, we'll see. But when it's like your money, you use it more intentionally. And so when vendors approach us, like Jessi said, like when you come to Lincoln Parish, we're going to say, this is what I need. This is what I need. If you come to Dubach, this is what I need. This is what I need. And if you can't do that, I'm not going to use my money, because we need you to be able to meet our needs. And you approached us, or maybe we approached you, I don't know, however it works. But you have to be able to accommodate what we need specifically. So vendors, we need you all to be flexible and or be able to adjust to what schools and districts need so that they will pick you. Because it's not that we don't want to pick you, but we're not going to just shelve out thousands of dollars from our school budgets that are being decreased seemingly every year if you can't meet our needs and help us to grow. Our job is, as school leaders, is to grow teachers so that they can grow students. And if we choose you, we expect you to be able to help in that capacity. We also want you to be a support system as the world is changing rapidly as far as what technologies are available, because we too have a very busy job, and if we have to do all the research on our own, why are we paying you?
The other thing I would say that about that, though, just from a vendor standpoint, like, you need to have your North Star. Like, when I go into districts and they want me to do something that's not the right thing for kids, I just tell them that's not the right thing for kids. Because you're not going to have every district. I mean, in our district, we felt like we were on the right track. But if they're not on the right track, I mean, I would stand firm and say, like, you're not on the right track. Don't listen to me, though.
You can keep that. Okay. So, key takeaways. Louisiana's story isn't perfect. There's a lot of messiness in this, but it is replicable. And that success really did hinge on the setting of a vision, getting clear on actions, pulling the levers. And I think you heard from the theme of the conversation from the state level to the district to the school to the vendor, how that through line was truly created, contextualized to each layer of the system, but still focused on that North Star, still focused on that vision of excellence for students. And as Jessi said, we got the receipts to prove it. A long way to go for sure. But what Louisiana did, any other state can do if they work together across the system. We have just a couple of minutes left, so I want to just pause there and open up for any questions from folks in the audience. Yeah, I'll come to you. Oh, thank you so much.
Hello, everyone. I'm Daniel Meekins. A couple things. Shout out to Louisiana. Tiffany, your accent, refreshing. Thank you so much. I'm feeling the energy. I had the privilege of starting my career as a special education teacher in South Louisiana, pushed in the classrooms. And it was the dynamic that y'all described, and I feel really lucky to have that. Also, wow, Blue Engine, what an organization. Funders, talk to Jessi. Let's do this. what I see the magic here is there's a real connective tissue with the relationship and the alignment and the buy-in from the systems level at the district to the school level to the vendor. And I imagine there are organizations in the room today that are trying to figure that out, right? Like, how do I get that with states and districts and schools? What advice do you have to them, one? And then two, Dana, you mentioned it could be a mixed bag when districts are making decisions without the guidance of the state. And I'm wondering, how can we take bright spots like this and maybe elevate them to the state or to other districts, like around the area? Thanks.
So at the state level, right, is this working? Okay. At the state level, I encountered hundreds, thousands, millions, it felt like at times, vendors. They fell into two camps. One was the vendors who came in or like sales. It was very clear, 5 seconds, you could figure it out. They wanted to make a sale. They didn't want to partner. And sometimes they get aggressive about it. Sometimes they got kind of mean about it. And then they email my colleague across the hallway and thinking that like somehow they were going to get an in on that, like we didn't talk to each other. We talked to each other, right? And so, but then there were vendors like Blue Engine, like the work that Nate Levinson did, like Sped Strategies, Self, All Means All, who came in and were like, we're trying to solve the same problem. You have an expertise and a perspective. I have an expertise and perspective. Can we just talk about it? Can we partner together on it? And the folks who came with that partner orientation, those were the ones that we ended up partnering with. Those are the ones that we built enduring relationships with. We've been vetted for quality. Then we sort of set them up with districts and schools. But it was that partnership angle that really differentiated, and it does not take long to figure it out.
The only thing I would add is, like, we've had partnerships with several different vendors, and what I'll do is I'll reach out to the State Department and say, hey, I usually reach out to the State Department and say, I need more money to keep doing this, and then I'll say there are other districts around, because I used to work for the State Department, so I care about other districts, and I would say there's other districts around that need money for this too, and then they'll try to give it to us. But I do think it is important to find those bright spots, like you said, and then use those as opportunities for folks to come in and not only see what it looks like, but get to talk to the district people and the vendor together and see what that partnership looks like. I think just it being modeled for them, I think, is important. Oh, yes, of course.
Okay. One thing that I hope is not a takeaway of folks who are in the partnership seat is like, hey, just the secret is go find a team that's got all of these things figured out. Like, yes, find them. You're going to be really happy and successful. And one learning that we've had, we used to just work with teachers, like just teachers. And then we thought it was this huge leap to start working with school leaders. And then we thought it was a huge leap to work with district level instructional coaches. And then we had CAOs and superintendents being like, but like, I don't have the, and we were like, but who are we? The reality is, going back to what Kristi said, if you have expertise in what it takes for a student to experience conditions that will make them successful, you can help a school leader, a district leader, a state agency backwards plan. Okay, if this is true, then what has to be true here? You can help them with that logic model, and that's where we have grown, because at the end of the day, we know what it takes for kids in the classroom. And so if you're sitting there thinking like, I have to find this like perfect place to work, that's not it either. And so it's just like a lesson learned, as well as like stretch yourselves, because I think that there's a lot that can be done there and a lot of people who want to get this right.
Okay, I think we're at time. Okay. As we close out, I just want to take a quick moment. These are 4 adults on the stage who have been involved in this work in Louisiana, but it is the work of thousands of educators across the state in Louisiana focused on this vision, taking those actions, and a couple of them are in the room today. So I just want to name Catherine Posniak, who led our fiscal strategy in truly ingenious ways. If you want to talk federal funding, that's your lady there. She is an absolute genius in this and was the architect behind so much of that. Stacy Moorhead, who created the first-in-class vendor marketplace for special education and led so much of the work behind the scenes. And I don't think Kunjan is here anymore. She stepped out, okay. Our secret architect, and also a preview for her session in the main plenary later today on states. And then other vendors in the room. I see folks like All Means All and others. I think I saw Self, Center for Learner Equity, Jennifer Coco, who was at NOLA PS. All of those folks played such a critical role, and they remain such key partners to us now, and so many more who I can't name now. It truly is a village kind of effort. And thank you all so much for the time today. Really appreciate it.